All right. Adam, I'm going to have you and I'm going to have the listeners close your eyes if you will, unless you're driving. Don't close your eyes if you're driving.
Pull over first.
You have been on a boat for the last 10 hours and you're finally at a point. It's dark outside. You hear coming over the loudspeaker, all hands start to lower landing vessels. And as you see, you're awake, you're out on the deck. You see them start to lower your landing craft down into the water. You're 10 miles out from the French coast. And you're wearing all of your stuff, all your equipment that you're going to take with you. You have to climb over the side of this ship you're on and climb down a cargo net into this wooden, I don't want to say rickety, but this wooden flat bottom boat with you and 36 other guys.
What's my underwear situation like?
It might be dry still at this point, depending on how the climb down goes. If you slip and fall, it might be a little wet. You get into this, and you have to wait then, bobbing up and down out there, hoping this thing doesn't float or doesn't sink, for all these other guys on the boat to get down with you. And all of a sudden, motor cranks up, and you guys start heading out toward France with the sun just starting to light the sky. And as you do that, you hear the loudest thing you've ever heard flying over your head as the naval artillery opens up behind you to start bombing the coast. While you're in this boat, you look up and you see more planes in the sky than you can count flying over you, heading toward the coast as well. And as you watch the coast, you see tiny dots of explosions erupting everywhere. You can hear the noise. The boat just keeps going forward, splashing water into the boat. You're wet at this point, seasick. And as you get closer and closer, by the way, this trip, how long do you think this trip takes you?
Probably 45, 50 minutes.
Try about 2.5 to 3 hours. And you're just heading slowly, and the sound gets louder and louder as you start to hear gunfire, explosions, and then eventually someone tells you 30 seconds. Boat comes to a stop, door goes down, and all you see is machine gun fire coming at you, things exploding, and you're supposed to just run right toward it. Your buddies that are in your unit with you that you've known are getting cut down all around you, explosions going off, body parts.
Yeah, I mean, the probably the thing that I get in that image the most, and it just popped up when you said that, but like, there's no retreat.
No.
You're backed up against that water.
Yeah, and you're hoping too when that ramp goes down that you could still be out waist deep water. You jump off, you trip, you fall down. You're having to pick yourself up from being drowned by all your equipment.
You're holding your rifle above your head as you're coming in to make sure nothing else gets wet.
Do you just have to have the mentality that, like, at that point it's up to fate? Like, I'm not a big believer like in fate or anything, but I think you almost have to put your mind to be like, either I'm going to make it out of this thing or I'm not. And regardless of what I do or where I hide or anything like that, it's not going to change that outcome.
I think that the leaders, the guys that ran the plan, I think that they knew this. I don't think the guys that were out on the boats had quite come to that reality yet.
The guys that were going to be storming the beaches.
Yeah, I don't think that there was anything just to lay that explanation out like you just did. Nobody's mind could ever go there.
No.
You could never prepare for that.
No.
So you just have to know, you have to have faith in whatever you believe in that's going to get you through that.
Or put absolute trust in the person that is going to be telling you what to do.
Yeah.
And just trust that whatever they're going to tell you to do, if you do it without question in that moment, that it's somehow going to keep you alive.
You have to trust every chain of command and every chain of logistics that have gotten you there, that they're going to get you there, A, in the right place, B, at the right time, and C, with some sort of an advantage.
Well, I mean, this was the reality of essentially everybody during those first few waves of the D-Day invasions of Normandy. And last week we covered essentially the build up for Operation Overlord, and today's the money shot basically.
Today's the B-Day, almost. For us, it's the B-Day of D-Day.
That's no, it'll be tomorrow.
So it's
This, yeah. So we're dropping this the day before the anniversary of D-Day. So hopefully you're searching for this and you find this episode. But yeah, this is D-Day. And funny thing about the term D-Day, so D-Day,
no idea what it means.
the D means day.
It's
And,
Day.
Okay, D-Day is any day that was designated essentially for like a military operation or invasion. The reason that D-Day is now synonymous with this is because this is the largest one. It's the one that everybody knows it as. So technically, during the invasion of Sicily, there was a D-Day there. It was just the day that the operation happened.
Oh, no shit.
Yes. It would just happen to be D-Day for that operation. I don't know if it means technically like designated day, but this is now synonymous with D-Day.
Huh.
But it's just a military term.
I didn't
Technically,
know
it's
that.
considered the Battle of Normandy. So this is the fruition, essentially, of years of planning to try to establish a foothold to beat the Nazis back out of Western Europe and essentially put a knife right through it. And, overall, what these men went through, it's not surprising that even guys that just went through this, like, maybe like, I'm thinking like this would never be something that you would want to talk about.
No.
The things that you would see. And so, which I'm not saying that's a shame or anything like that, but I think that because it was such an event that was so scarring for so many people that's why not a lot of people actually know in a detailed way, like what the sacrifice was, like how terrifying and how much courage it took to do this, because those people probably just don't want to talk about it. The biggest relation that people can probably make, like we said back in the previous episode, is the opening scene from Saving Private Ryan. They did screenings of that. The first screening they did, the premiere, was actually at at Normandy at Omaha Beach. And they'd invited all of the survivors from Omaha Beach to that. I know. So they told them what they would be seeing and everything like that. They did say that a few of them had to kind of step out, everything, but they also talked to a lot of them, and the majority of them were happy, and they said that it's the closest they've seen of a portrayal of it, but it still wasn't close. And how could it be?
Yeah,
But I mean, the carnage essentially is just, you can only show so much in a movie. But I mean, in real life, like that's what the reality, that beach, all those beaches were mined. People were getting blown up, body parts being shot off, just bodies in the surf and everything, the water turning red. All that stuff was real.
and so much of it on the tail end. Just thinking about that and thinking, like, I would say probably the troops that come home from Afghanistan could almost more relate to World War II troops than anybody else. Mm-hmm. Because other than that, like, we're fighting against other countries or other, like, militant groups.
I think maybe, too, they could have a relation, or they could kind of relate to Vietnam, for the aspect of, I think, the Afghanistan war, smaller pockets, not really a standing army, more of like that kind of stuff. But I think it's when it comes to combat, I think all of them kind of share a universal language that no one else understands.
But it's shit like here we're talking about mines are everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And during World War II, like a bridge crossing or anything like that in enemy territory is probably going to have mines or something on it. Just like over in Afghanistan, when you're fighting against the Taliban, kind of a more closer to like a primal fighting style where they're creating IEDs. Like seeing a tank get blown up or in like a mine blast back then is probably fairly similar to seeing an IED blow up on the side of a road for any Afghani soldiers.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So essentially, what kicks this off is the night of June 5th. All of the ships leave their 20 departure points, loaded up with the troops that are going to essentially be loaded into these Higgins boats and then assault the beaches. They load them up onto their boats and they meet right off the Isle of Wight at a designated place called Piccadilly Circus. I mentioned that last week.
What a wild name.
Well, they just named it after Piccadilly Circus in London. It's like their version of Times Square.
Piccadilly Circus?
You don't know what Piccadilly Circus is?
No.
So, like, it's basically London's version of Times Square. They've got, like, the Coca-Cola advertisement and, like, screens. It's kind of like, I think there's a big roundabout or something.
That's the worst name that I've ever heard.
You've never heard of Piccadilly Circus?
No.
Okay.
Times
well,
Square sounds cool. Piccadilly Circus sounds not cool. I see clowns.
That's...
Bad teeth.
Yeah. So they all start making their way essentially from that rendezvous spot. At that point, the ships kind of go off into their own columns, and they're actually preceded by minesweepers. So huge group of minesweepers go ahead of the main invasion fleet to make sure that they're not going to run into any mines and to clear any of those out of the way. On the night of June 5th, a little bit later, about 2,200 bombers, that's 2,200 bombers, leave, and their main focus is to hit targets along the beach and then inland of Normandy to start softening up targets. And so there was a little bit of cloud cover, and most of them, when you're flying in a plane like that at a couple hundred miles an hour, and you're trying to hit something like on a beach, half a second or a second, 2 seconds, it's too long.
Yeah.
So the bombing
You're going too fast.
Yeah, so the bombing at like Utah and Omaha wasn't very successful. The bombing that took place kind of more on the eastern side of the invasion over toward like Sword and Juneau. And what was the easternmost one? Oh no, that was Sword.
Yeah, and then Gold was like right in the middle.
Gold was right in the middle. Those were a little bit more successful. So these planes all take off. Also, just after midnight is when the 1,200 planes that were carrying the 3 airborne divisions take off from England. Now, they're not taking off. There's 25,000 airborne paratroopers that are dropping. So they're not all just taking off from one place. So essentially, you have 1,200 planes from around Britain where these guys are stationed, loading up onto the planes with all of the equipment that they're going to be jumping with to survive for the next 3 or 4 or 5 days. Into these, I think they're C-47s. They call them Dakotas, Skytrains.
The darkest part of night, and depending on how many airfields they're launching them from, if it's 12 airfields, that's 100 planes that they have to get in the air? I think it was even
more than 12. It was probably somewhere between because also they had to house the guys there for a while. So, I mean, you really wanted to spread that out. It was probably quite a bit more than 12. I know that they had to take off, and then they actually some of the planes had to go into, a holding pattern until the groups all formed up.
So much coordination.
Yeah, and especially when the planes are maybe just communicating via radio with each other, and there's not, a proximity, anything like that to keep you... I mean, you're flying in decently close formation to do that.
In the dead of night, in probably the darkest part of night.
I think they took off right as it was getting dark. They were able to load up and everything and then take off.
Oh, you said 2,200 hours, right?
No, I said just after midnight.
Oh,
That's when they started heading over the channel. So they fly over essentially the invasion fleet, and the planes, essentially the British ones, kind of are heading more to the east, American ones to the west, and when they get over the coast, about a half an hour before these planes took off, there was I don't know how many planes there were in, but there was something in the neighborhood. They were called Pathfinders. I think there was something like 300 of these guys. Their job was to basically jump out of these planes. They would fly in low and fast, jump out of these planes, and their job was to set up these beacons that would then guide in the other planes, bringing the 25,000 paratroopers to their landing zones. So these guys were actually the first people in occupied Britain, in occupied France. Landing, most of the time, just a few of the guys, enemy territory, to set up these beacons, to make sure that these planes could find their way in.
Wildly important that these guys survive.
Yes. And despite these guys setting up these beacons or being able to set up as many as they can, eventually when it does come time for, the airborne troopers, they start flying over France to their drop zone. As soon as they start flying over, anti-aircraft fire and flak just starts lighting up the sky. Because you can hear these planes coming. There's 12, not 1,200 of them in one area, but if they're splitting off and sending an equal distance, that's 600 planes flying over.
Yeah, it's a lot. That's going to draw attention.
And you're having to fly over. It's not like you're just able to fly over the sea, drop them right on the coast, and then bail out. You're getting them miles inland. And so as you bring them over and you're experiencing this anti-aircraft fire, some of the planes are trying to kind of avoid it, gaining altitude. They have to be at a specific speed and altitude for these guys to be able to jump. I think they're jumping from about 600 feet.
When we were talking about it last night, the way that I kind of see it was as they were jumping out of the planes, there was something that was still connected to the plane that would
static. They call it a static line. So if anyone has ever watched Band of Brothers, go back and watch it. It's the first or second episode where they actually jump. If you've never seen the series, I highly recommend it. It's great. But so in this plane, you would have, I think, 16 guys per plane. And you'd be sitting on each side facing each other on benches. In the middle, along the top, there was a steel cable. And when you stood up and you were getting ready to jump, you had a hook that hooked on and locked onto this cable. That hook was attached to your chute. So as you jumped out of the plane, it pulled your chute for you. So
as you cleared the propellers and everything else.
Yeah, the bag on it had like a 12-foot piece of rope. And so you would get out past the tail, and then the bag would come off and the chute would come out. So you had these 16 guys, and as you're getting closer, you're under fire. The plane's jostling back and forth. Some planes were getting hit. Some of the planes didn't even have navigators, man. Some of them were just the pilots that were responsible for trying to find these points. And what they had to do with this homing beacon situation, if every plane, it would basically send out a signal and then wait for a response. And then as the response got shorter, that's how you would be able to tell.
Oh, okay.
If every plane was using theirs, it would jam it up to where it wasn't giving you a proper reading. So the only planes that could have this on were like the lead planes in these formations. So you'd have to be able to keep an eye on them to know when to drop and be watching these lead planes and the planes ahead of you while trying to dodge enemy fire and keep your plane steady and everything. So once you finally do get to what you determine is the drop zone, the pilot, or getting near it, the pilot would turn on a light in the back of the plane. There would be a red light near the door. They would all stand up. Everyone would hook onto the line. They would do an equipment check where the guy behind you would make sure your stuff was secure.
Oh, good.
And they would call it down. 15 okay, 14 okay, 13 okay, and they'd tap each other on the shoulder. 12 okay, 11 okay, and finally 1 okay. And then usually their commanding officer was the guy standing by the door. Getting them all out of the plane was usually one of the last ones to go. So they're holding there while that light's red. As soon as the pilot detects that they're above the landing zone or wants to get the fuck out of there, he flips another switch, the light turns to green, and those guys are out. And I was watching some footage, like recovered footage from actual jumps and everything. They are literally on each other's asses so hard trying to get out of this plane. Like one guy jumps and it almost looks like the other guy is like reaching out to have him pull him out of the plane too. And I was like, why the fuck are they doing that? Like I could understand wanting to get out of a plane, not wanting it to go down.
Yeah.
I realized that when you see them coming out, those are all the guys that are within your like squad or your unit that you would be familiar with. Even a split second, that distance between you guys jumping out of that plane and where you're going to land could be 100 yards.
Yeah.
And then to try to find each other again and hope there's not a German position between you two, you would want to be as close to your unit as possible. So I could see why these guys are literally just like almost like on each other's asses trying to hug each other coming out of this thing.
Human centipede out of the thing.
Yeah. And throughout this whole thing, only about 10% of the paratroopers hit their landing zones. That's not survival or anything like that, but only just 10% hit their designated
where they were
zones.
supposed to be, yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, they were scattered, from the American side, they were dropped primarily behind Utah Beach, and they were kind of scattered all over the peninsula. And then on the other side, they were still kind of scattered on the British side over at Sword Beach, but I think they may have hit a few more spots a little bit more accurately.
You got guys that are hitting the water, though. You have guys that are
flooded
landing
fields.
on bases.
Flooded
fields.
Landing in these flooded fields, landing on top of German positions. There was one guy in the town of, it might have been Cannes, and his parachute snagged on the top of a steeple on a building. He ended up getting captured. Then he escaped. He still has, they put up a statue or an effigy of a paratrooper hanging from the steeple in this town that's still there. Yes.
That's awesome.
Because, I mean, he was there to help liberate France. So you have these guys jumping out and essentially going to complete missions before the landing has even taken place. Some of them are, their missions are to essentially capture towns that are like crossroads towns for traveling in to try to connect the beaches together. Mm-hmm. Others are assigned to take out gun emplacements that can reach down and hit the beach. So there's all these different missions that all of these scattered paratroopers have to find each other. Most of them, because they're so separated, end up just creating mismatched units because although they're jumping and they're in a wide swath, if you had like I'm going to use the one off of Band of Brothers. So you have Easy Company, which is part of like 7 companies, A through F, I think, like that. So you have all of those companies basically all trying to land within a swath or flying their planes all kind of together. Mm-hmm. So you would kind of probably know guys from other companies and everything. So people would essentially band together to try to then go accomplish these missions or try to meet at assembly areas to then go off and try to accomplish these missions. I mean, they had stuff they had to do even before the invasion was set to kick off.
You're not the guys I need, but you're the guys I have.
Exactly. And at that point, man, it's dark. You're in the middle of occupied France. You see someone who meets, is wearing the same uniform as you, and you're like, thank fucking Christ. They had a way of signaling to each other, code words. So if like you saw someone and they saw you, like it was flash, and then the other person was supposed to say thunder, and you would know it was friendly. Like if you're hiding in the bushes. They also had these tiny little things that were like little noisemakers that almost made just like a popping sound, like
a dog clicker.
Yep. And they would have those, so if they didn't want to have to make any noise or anything like that, they could click it once and it almost sounded like a bug. Uh-huh. And then you would hear a click from the other side, and then you could be like flash, and you would wait for the response of thunder. So that's how they could also kind of find each other or make sure that they weren't just stumbling into like a German patrol.
Yeah, I mean, I figure at that point, if you were to say anything and it sounded English, you'd be like, cool, you're good.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you're probably so fucking scared shitless and panicked at that point anyway.
Had you said something and you heard a gun blast, that was probably German.
Yeah. Well, at the same time that these guys are getting towed in to jump in from the paratroopers, some of these planes are towing gliders. And these aren't like, honey, hey, take a picture, I'm hang gliding, I'm dead. No, these are like basically planes just without engines.
I don't get it.
Okay, so explain.
No, I get it. I don't understand how we use this much of this kind of technology, because there was a lot of gliders, weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few. So the whole point about using a glider is, like we were talking about, some of the missions of these guys were to establish, take over villages or establish defensive positions to push away counterattacks that were going to come in. You can't fight against tanks if you're just jumping with a rifle or even just like a bazooka. So these gliders that they had, they were pretty decent size. Some of them, or a lot of them that they were using, bigger than the actual transport planes that the paratroopers were going in. Those could hold 16. I think the gliders could hold something like, I want to say 20 plus, or you could sub out some of the guys and you could actually bring in like a Jeep or a field gun.
Yep.
And so they were also quiet, and they could bring in artillery. And if these things were to go ahead and land, the front of them had a hinge on it, just like you see some huge transport planes. And then they could just drive the Jeep or artillery and pull it out and then unload the soldiers.
Well, and they said part of that idea, too, was they strapped whatever the payload was. So if it was like a Jeep or something like that, they strapped it down, but then they also strapped it to the wire.
Yeah.
And so if the attachments broke as it landed, it would pull on the wire and it would pull open that nose.
That's right.
So the payload wouldn't come crashing through and blow up like the pilots of the glider. It would just slide right on out of the machine.
That would be crazy if that happened. You're landing you're already having to crash land in a field essentially, and then you feel literally you start to go vertical to point up, and the Jeep just shoots out from underneath you.
But you're so glad the Jeep didn't just hit you.
But so one of the missions, these guys had 2 missions that I got to talk about. These glider guys, both British on the British side. One of them was, and for some reason, the British airborne part of it had an operational name. The American side didn't.
We didn't need one.
Yeah, so the British called it Operation Tonga, and one of the areas that they needed to try to capture was between the beach and this like village or town called Cannes.
Film festival. Film festival.
No. It's a Caen or Cean or something.
okay.
It's not con like that one. So these guys, it's a 3 glider squad, and their job is to capture this bridge called the Pegasus Bridge. The pilots are so fucking good that they land these 3 planes within 47 yards of the bridge. The troops are able to jump out and completely catch any of the Germans guarding this thing completely off guard. Some of them were still ducking their heads and covering their ears from the naval bombardment. They took them completely by surprise. It was like the perfect execution you could do for this.
That's sort of the other thing about gliders, is they're quieter.
Well, yeah.
Like, you don't have engines or anything like that, so your presence is coming in still probably pretty loud, just thinking how big they were.
I don't know. I mean, you would probably hear like for like the wind catching the wings, but I mean, these things were primarily made of almost all wood, and then just had like canvas stretched over the wings. I mean, I'm sure you would hear something. Here's the thing, though, is like it's dark, man.
Yeah.
Like, you got a full moon and everything, but you have to know. And of course, if this is your job, you've literally studied every reconnaissance photo, every bit of information. You know exactly what's next to the bridge, so you have an idea of where you're going to try to land. But to find it, execute that, land in a field, not crash, have your men be able to jump out and fight and capture that within literally minutes of you landing. And to capture that bridge was incredible.
Well, yeah, if you hit that close, 47 yards isn't enough distance between you and really anything to be able to get your wits about you, get your gun, and start trying to defend yourself. Like, that's a very quick come up.
Yeah. So there was that one, and then they also had a mission to try to complete before the landings, a separate British unit, but to take out what was called the Merville Gun Battery. Did you look into this at all? So,
is this the one where they climbed up the cliffs?
No, that's during the invasion. That's Point du Hoc.
Oh, that's right. That wasn't gliders. That was.
So the Merville Gun Battery was about 8 miles away from Sword Beach, but it had like 4 100 millimeter howitzer cannons that could fire far enough and were sighted in for Sword Beach.
Was this the one where they said that it could hit 2 different beaches?
No, that was Point du Hoc.
Oh, okay.
Because it could hit Utah and Omaha.
Okay.
So they had 4 of these 4 huge like gun encasements that were surrounded and they were 6 feet thick, concrete, steel reinforced. They had a bunch of AA guns, 15 machine guns positions covering the entire area. They then had, I think, barbed wire that was stacked up about 8 feet tall across a field, and then a minefield inside that barbed wire.
They had some shit and it was fortified.
It was real fucking defended. So there was a group of, essentially they were commandos that came in, and part of them dropped in and part of them were a glider unit, paratroopers and then glider. There were supposed to be 600 men that were supposed to assemble, that this was their mission. They were waiting for guys to assemble. They had assembled about 150 men, and it came to the point where it was like, if we don't fucking take this, they're just going to be able to start opening fire as soon as the invasion begins. We got to try to do it now. Can't remember the commander's name. Should have written it down. But he takes 150 men, no heavy weapons, no equipment to try to take out like the defenses or anything like that. And he's able to, I believe he uses a distraction. One of the gliders comes in and actually, I think it might have landed like within that like complex, not like close to, but like out by the barbed wire.
Yeah.
And so that starts drawing fire from the Germans. They had, the night before they landed, some of the guys had snuck up and created holes in the barbed wire for them to get through under the cover of darkness and everything. So they had ways to get through, and had also cleared a few paths through the minefield. So he attacks this position with about 150 men. They lose half of them, but they actually are able to capture this.
That's a big get, because if you're coming up that way and that thing is active, it's mowing down a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. those things would take out anything that could land on that beach. If it hit it, there's, tanks, landing craft, anything like that, concentration of troops, they're dead.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the only having 150 men and just having that, like, we're supposed to have 600. We have a quarter of that, but like, this is our duty. This is our mission. Like, there's no to this.
Yeah.
We have to do this. Like, if we don't do this, how many other people are going to die if we don't put our lives on the line to do this?
You did whatever you had to do at that point. Like, it's sort of like there was a going back at that point, and I'm sure there probably were some people that were shaken up that didn't show up to the party because they weren't prepared to do that. Mm-hmm. But eventually, when push comes to shove, you still have to make whatever happen. And it sounds like they were damn lucky that glider flew in there and took on that fire.
Yeah. Drew some of it. Yeah. And so this is all happening essentially before the boots are even on the beach.
A time before, because they also said that there was so much smoke by the time they were trying to provide the cover once they hit the beach and they were going over in the air. There was so much smoke in the air from just the war that they were having a tough time.
It was because of the artillery that the Navy was firing, catching a bunch of grass fields on fire
on
the backside of the beach. Yep, and that ended up working against them because then they couldn't see anything.
Yeah, your drops from airplanes were obscured by all the smoke.
So, the boats that are next to the boats that are approaching their designated beaches, again, about 10 miles offshore, this is when they load up the Higgins boats with, 36 guys that are driving right into the jaws of death. That's actually the name of the picture, the famous picture where it's from inside the Higgins boat on Omaha and you're looking out and it's just smoky and you can see the guys moving. That's called Into the Jaws of Death.
Was that an actual picture that was taken?
It's an actual picture. Yeah, it's probably one of the most famous pictures from D-Day. You'd know it if you saw it.
I know what you're talking about. I just didn't realize it was an actual picture.
Yeah, it's an actual picture. So, yeah, you're loaded up 10 miles out. It takes you 2.5, 3 hours. And the way I figured that out is because they did an interview with the Higgins boat driver, and he said round trip took 6 to 7 hours to drop guys off, pull back out, and go get more guys and bring them back.
So your legs are already shot before you get to the beach.
You're standing the whole time.
Yeah,
you're just trying to keep your balance.
That's what I'm saying. You're firing all those muscles to keep standing on those things, and then you have to get off and fight an entire war.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it differed from beach to beach. I think the first people that landed were actually at Utah. And crazy thing about Utah is there is the oldest person that storms the beaches as part of the campaign. He's a 56-year-old. He's not a general. He's a captain or a major.
You're talking about
Junior.
Yeah.
And I don't even think he was supposed to go when they were getting ready to land or getting ready to get on the boats. I don't know if he asked someone to be able to go or his commanding officer, but they said that what he provided when they did land was invaluable. He had to walk with a cane, and he would carry his pistol in his other hand, and everything. But they said when the boats were coming in to land on Utah because of the wind and the chop, it blew them off course by a mile. They landed a mile off from there, but it was still within an area of Utah Beach. So when they landed, they weren't taking a lot of fire. They were taking a little bit of artillery fire and everything, but he said they got off the beach and they're like, I don't recognize anything where we're at. There's supposed to be a building and a windmill. That's what our map was designating us. So he goes and he takes a look and like crawls up on a sandbank and looks, and he can see like the windmill like down the beach off in the distance. And his two options at that point, rallying his men, he's like, well, I can either take us down the beach. He's like, we're not getting fired on here. We're not. He's like, the war starts here, it looks like.
It sounds like being blown off course is like 50% good, 50% bad.
Yeah.
Like it seems like it should be something that was a bigger deal, but it's almost like it was just kind of like, like it was negligible to what was about to happen, really. Well,
and the other thing too is because had they moved and gone back further down the beach, they're going to be walking. It's not like they can like back the boat up and take us further. It's not like
no,
that.
There's no reverse in this situation.
But then everyone following you as part of this landing wave is going to be blown off course into this same spot. So why don't you consolidate all your power, and then you can move out, because you weren't, again, being really fired upon at that point. That's one of the things that another guy pointed out, is like, they're not even really firing. They don't know, like, if they're going to give us a weak spot, we're going to go and take this.
Yeah, you're not taking fire from both sides. You're just taking fire from directly in front of you. Like, it's not coming from the right or the left, depending
and
on
even
where
then,
you're
I
coming
think
out.
it was really lightly defended as far as even emplacements in front of them. It just might have been a stretch where they didn't expect them to land. Kind of like you were talking about, I think it blew them more off course to the more west than east. So Utah Beach and Omaha Beach, they're separated essentially by this river that comes through. But you know, like when a river meets like the ocean, it has like a big estuary where it fans out.
Yeah, it's a mouth.
The mouth of it. So it's a wider gap for them to be separated by. So kind of in between this gap, though, there's about 100-foot high cliff that almost like juts out into the water. It almost looks like the top of a Hershey Kiss, the way it kind of goes out like that. And this was called Point du Hoc. And this is, I think, what you were talking about. And the Germans had set up a huge artillery position with a bunch of artillery guns that could fire down and have direct visibility on both Utah and Omaha Beach.
Yeah.
It could also look directly out, and if any boats got too close, it could fire on boats coming in. So Point du Hoc gets assigned to these Army Rangers, and there's 200 of them. And their job is to essentially scale these 100-foot cliffs straight up to assault the enemy position and take out that artillery area. And through a combination of grappling hooks, fire ladders that they took from like the London and like British fire departments and everything, like hook ladders.
They said that they took the ladders from the fire departments back home. Mm-hmm. Like, that's how much we were piecemealing this together.
They said they had developed some type of like device that could fire a grappling hook, like a grappling gun.
Yeah, Batman.
Yeah, a Batman gun that would be able to get them like up a little higher and then be able to keep climbing. The whole time they're scaling this cliff, they're having grenades and fire fired down on them.
You just are climbing
Did you look
up.
at any pictures of this? It's fucking crazy.
I don't know if I even want to see the pictures, because I just have it in my mind of like, you're climbing up the side of this sheer face almost, and you just look over and you hear a grenade like clink against the side of the mountain right next to you, but it doesn't blow up, and you're like, okay, well that was good that missed me. And then you hear it blow up, and then you hear somebody firing
a little bit lower than you. Yeah.
You hear it firing from people firing down on you from above you. Like, the thought that this was even possible is so mind-blowing.
They lucked out, I think, because there were still people there manning that position. They end up getting a lot of their guys to the top. And they get their guys to the top, and they're able to actually secure the position, but they end up finding out that all of the artillery pieces and guns there, they were actually moved.
Yeah.
And it's because the Allied bombing was so heavy, and that position was pretty exposed. Mm-hmm. It's a fucking
being out
jutting
on the
out
point,
that they didn't want the weapons to get taken out. So they moved them, I think they said like 600 yards back away and hid them in an orchard. These guys end up finding them, these Rangers, and they ended up destroying them anyway. What happens, though, is these guys were supposed to be able to signal to their reinforcements, another like group of Rangers, if they needed reinforcements coming up. So these guys do end up coming under fire from the Germans and falling back to essentially not the cliffs, but the position on top of the cliffs, because it was built up to house the gun batteries.
Yeah.
So it was a defensible position, and ended up being under attack, I think, from the Germans for a couple days before they were relieved.
Wow.
And lost quite a few guys, but they ended up holding the position. But that group of Rangers that was going to come in and reinforce them, they were supposed to be able to send them some type of signal that they needed reinforcements. Yeah. They couldn't send it, and so they ended up just going, I think, to Utah Beach to help out, or going to Omaha Beach to help out.
Reinforcements left.
Yeah.
Shit.
And never made it. But, to assign that, like that's your job. Like, the guy comes up to me, he's like, "So what's our mission?" He's like, "You see these cliffs right here with all of these guns on it?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "So, like, are we going to, like, is the Navy going to bomb those, or, like, the airplanes?" He's like, "Well, yeah, they're going to do that, but then we're going to need you guys to take it out, too." Okay, so Are we jumping in? Are we going to go in on the beaches and then come around the back?
Do we have Sherpas? Are there goats? What are we doing?
Well, we just thought you guys can maybe just climb the cliffs. From the beach, you guys just go straight up. Seems like the quickest route to it. Are there guys up there? Oh, yeah, there's Germans up there. Do they have guns? Most likely. So they're going to be shooting at us, right? Definitely.
And they're going to be tossing grenades down on top of you.
But, I mean, these guys made it up there and ended up taking the position. Like, it's so many just, like, different... Not stories, because, like, that makes you think they're false, but it's so many different accounts and events that happened during this one invasion of all these, like, singular acts of heroics and things like that. Guys getting stuck on the beach at, Utah was relatively light as far as people getting killed. It was actually the least deadly of all of the beaches getting stormed. Out of the 23,000 that landed on that beach on D-Day, only 170 were killed or wounded.
That's an incredible success rate.
Fucking incredible.
Especially when you're right next to Omaha.
So you move over, let's move over to Omaha. Omaha is probably the most famous of the beaches. I'm not just saying that because we are Americans. I'm saying that because this is where the most people died. So 34,000 American troops. One of the army groups was the Big Red One, and they were seasoned, like battle hardened from like the Mediterranean theater.
Yeah.
So they end up storming these beaches, and they were supposed to have tanks that were supposed to come in. The whole point of how they wanted this invasion to go and how the British kind of worked it is, let's get the armor onto the beach as quickly as possible because it can take more damage and it can take out positions. Behind the armor will land our troops. Right behind them, they can follow the armor in and also have that kind of support. So at Omaha...
The Brits had a solid plan.
They did. And at Omaha... the first people that made it onto the shore were essentially the infantry, and man, when they hit the beach, the accounts are like that beginning scene in Saving Private Ryan where the gate drops, and the Nazis just have them zeroed in on machine gun fire, and the first 6 or 7 guys just go down. I remember one guy's account that it actually happened. He was talking about how he was the first one out of the boat. The next guy to get out of the boat behind him was the 7th guy. Everyone else had gotten shot.
Shit.
And the biggest thing, I want to get to the whole... I want to kind of map out like the beach and everything to kind of try to paint a picture about how insane this was and just the bravery that it took to actually storm up these beaches. But I do have to pee real quick.
Okay.
All right, while we take a break from class and take care of some business, you can also take care of some business.
If you don't follow us on Instagram or Twitter already, our Instagram handle is Historically High Pod. That's Historically High POD. And our Twitter is Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right, and back to our show. All right. Let's talk beaches. Usually you go beach, nice, relaxing, great view. The beaches of France, they were a little bit unique in that the difference between like low tide and high tide, like you're saying, that's something you really don't think about, low tide, high tide. So the difference between low tide and high tide is when it's down at low tide, it extends the beachfront about 300 to 400 yards. Now, this wasn't exact for all of the beaches that they were storming. In some of the situations, I think more on the British side, either at Sword, Juno, or Gold, there was like even villages like right up almost to the beach to where it was very, very close.
Which one had the casino? One of them had a casino that the Nazis occupied.
Yeah, I can't remember where that was. That in Cannes, Saint-Merclise? I can't remember where that was. Look that up and find out. So, like we were kind of talking about in the previous episode last week, they chose to do it kind of in between low tide and high tide when the tide was coming in to help the landing craft, but to also spot obstacles. So even then, before you even get to what they call the shingle or the seawall,
yeah,
it was about 150 yards across open sand with no cover, with these guys just sighted up on you. just explosives, mines, machine gun fire, and you had to cross this while you were probably already soaking wet with all that weight on you, trying to get up to where you could actually get some cover after 150 yards at this little seawall. You would have to probably just like lay down and hunker down and try to gather some troops up to that point.
Monte Cassino.
Monte Cassino's in Italy.
The Battle of Monte Cassino reached crescendo in May. Oh, yeah. No, that's wrong. I don't know how to find it. That's a tough Google.
So after, right up where high tide comes is what's called the shingle. You know when you're at the beach and there's almost that strip of like larger rocks?
It's like almost like a shelf.
Yes, exactly. So that's where you would hit what was called the shingle. So right where after you hit the high tide mark. And then at that point, that's when you would see like the little bit of like a seawall. And then on the other side of that or before that, they would have just a shit ton of barbed wire. So there's obstacles stopping you from wherever you're trying to go. Omaha, you have no tanks on the beach. You have no way of getting through this. So they would have to bring up these things. They call them Bangalores. They're
badass.
So did you see? They're the huge long stick grenades,
Yep.
basically, and they would use them to clear obstacles. You would then have, at this point during this first wave, you had combat engineers come in, and their job was basically they didn't have guns or anything like that. They weren't there to fight. They were there to essentially wire all of the obstacles that they could with explosives to try to clear a path for any of the armor that actually did happen to make it onto the beach, of which at Omaha there was like none.
And you're just praying that somebody's going to lay cover fire for you.
Yes. Or you're praying that because maybe they don't see that you don't have a gun, they're not going to try to shoot at you. But guess what? You're trying to destroy these obstacles. They're shooting at anything and everything. Yeah. Then, after you happen to get past the seawall and the barbed wire, if you make it through, then there's about another 100 to 200 yards called the shelf. And that's another flat area that then leads up to the cliffs that they're firing at you from on top of. So all in all, a total distance, even if you're at mid-tide, of at least like 350 yards. So 3.5 football fields from when you get off and you're walking straight into enemy fire.
I don't know if this sounds super smart, but at that distance, there probably weren't a lot of rifles that were traveling that far being shot, but like the machine guns and shit would have enough force to carry a pretty accurate bullet from that far away.
I would assume so. And again, this isn't the designated, distance on all the beaches. Some were much closer to the cliffs. Some were, I don't think they really got any further. I think there was something at Utah where they said that it was about 300 yard stretch of sand leading up to where the defensive positions were. But even then, you're literally just charging straight into it. Do you serpentine? Do you run straight to save time? Like, do you go down on your belly every now and then to try to throw them off? Like, what the fuck do you do? You're trying not to stay grouped together because that's more of an opportunity. So you're trying to stay off by yourself, but stay close. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's got to be some type of lizard brain where you kick into just like, I need to get from here to here, and like I'm in shock and I just need to operate.
It's just fight or flight.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there's a lot of those guys that had they been interviewed that survived afterwards, and they're like, so what was your plan out there? It's like, I don't know. I kind of blacked out for a second to get where I needed to be. Like,
try to get up where I could see where they maybe couldn't hit me from.
Yeah.
And then after that, try to gather myself and get to the next spot where they couldn't shoot at me from.
I had so much adrenaline and endorphins flowing. All I knew was that I got from one place to another place.
The big thing with Omaha is it had the strongest defenses. It also had the most seasoned troops. There was a company or a unit of troops there that come from the Eastern Front that were a little more seasoned, and so they knew what they were doing. So they were also fighting more knowledgeable soldiers. But Omaha ends up having the worst casualties. So out of the 34,000 troops that stormed Omaha, and again, this isn't all at one time. This is having to come in waves. So this is the total throughout the day. The fighting for Omaha to actually take the beach and push inland just a little bit was literally an all-day affair. By the end of the day, I don't think they had like completely like taken over the beach yet. They were still like pockets of fighting.
Well, and it's exactly like you said. They were coming in waves, so anybody that landed first had to either make a move up or you were mowed down.
Exactly.
Like, you couldn't just sit there and wait because there were just waves of other troops coming.
And the longer that you were waiting, someone up in that German bunker is telling the artillery from the last shot you fired, hey, shift that over 30 yards to the left if you can and dial it back 15 feet, and you're going to hit a big group of guys trying to take cover.
So you just got to scatter. You got to hit, turn into a cockroach, and just start trying to move up.
And so with Omaha, it had some pretty high cliffs on it. And Omaha Beach is kind of a crescent moon shaped. and everything, and it's on both sides of it. It's kind of hemmed in by cliffs.
It's a beautiful beach.
It's an insanely beautiful beach. Not that day.
No,
But
not that
the way
day.
you
But
look at it now, yeah, it's very beautiful. But
it's still like just looking at pictures of it. No matter how pretty it looks, every picture you just know like there's something in the pit of your stomach. Something bad happened.
or you
there.
can still see some of the concrete pillboxes and like fortifications
Yeah.
and stuff. Like looking over
there's
the beach, and you're just like, Jesus.
you know that something very bad took place. I wonder, do you, if you took a metal detector out there like just for funsies on Omaha Beach, would it just never stop going off because there's shit buried underneath
I'm sure
the
a
sand?
lot of people have actually done that, but I'm sure you would still, after some searching, hit some stuff.
You would have to.
Yeah, especially like going out like a low tide, where some of that stuff is covered by underwater obstacles. Fucking bullets that fell off of guys that got shot in the water and drowned and all that kind of stuff. Like, how many guys, like a lot of these, when they were bringing in the Higgins boats, if you would hit one of these, they're not all getting up to the beach and dropping these doors down. They're hitting obstacles. Some of them are hitting the mines.
Yeah.
Guys are having to bail over the sides and then try to swim.
That's the other thing, is think about how many times they would have had to have gone through after the war and swept that thing for mines. Mm-hmm. Because even if you leave one out there and you let people go out there and something happens, like they had to have combed through that thing with a fine-tooth comb to just get every little bit of dangerous shit that was going on.
Is it like off Spaceballs, where it's actually a comb?
Yeah,
and they're dragging it through
yeah.
the desert.
But that's just to think about that place has been turned into what it is now with just the absolute horror that it saw is tough to understand.
Well, and the fighting was just so crazy there that there were certain like draws and gullies that would be natural progressions to go off the beach, lower ground that would help you get up to the higher ground. Well, of course, those were all totally defended as much as possible to not let anyone off the beach. So eventually they said that throughout the day it came down to just like, commanding officers, guys that were just in charge of like other soldiers, putting together little groups and being like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to climb up on this hillside, and we're going to try to scramble out of here and try to come around from the back, because the thing about the defenses, and kind of going back to what we were talking about with like Rommel's preparations, think of it as like the Atlantic Wall and these defenses being like a crust. And once you punch through it, there wasn't a lot of strength behind. It was a lot of sporadic little like machine gun nests, little fortifications, but it wasn't strong all the way through. Usually how the Nazis had been so successful with like being attacked or counterattacked is they would like to have what they call strength in depth. They wanted to have a solid bench, basically. So you would have your soldiers up front, and you would keep your armor kind of behind a little bit behind. But if that first line broke, you had your armor right behind to push up. And I think that's kind of what Rommel was after in this situation, but he didn't have the manpower tanks to do it.
No, because Mustache didn't let him have any more of them.
So you have, these pockets of Americans that are kind of putting guys together and scrambling up this. And if they can get behind these defenses, they start making headway and start taking out kind of these like little fortifications one at a time.
You can breathe again.
Yeah.
Is basically what it comes down to. You can get to a point where you don't have to be just looking for gunfire all the time.
And you see a group of guys going up there, and it inspires more guys to move up, and you're finally making some headway. So that beach definitely had the toughest time. Again, a lot of these the other beaches were taken within a few hours, if not half the day. But still, by the end of the first day, the fighting on Omaha Beach wasn't completely done. It was so bad that at a certain point after, I think, the first or second wave, that they actually paused sending anyone else in. And the guy that was in charge of the American portion, Omar Bradley, he was actually tempted to just cancel the Omaha Beach landing. I don't know what that would have done as far as trying to fold the other guys around the back of Omaha Beach from the other ones or anything, but it's good that they didn't. It would have potentially bought the Germans more time to have reinforcements brought up.
Yeah, well, that was part of the reason why the first bombings that happened before they even landed on the beach were so important, because it choked off any supplies to that Atlantic Wall.
Well, the whole thing is, so what kind of the argument was to keep the tanks back is, and this is what Rommel's point was, why you shouldn't keep the tanks back. He's like, if you guys need to then move the tanks up to try to counterattack or try to push these guys back in the ocean, they have air superiority. They're just going to launch their fighter bombers and they'll just take out your columns of tanks on the road before they even get here. I need these things up close to where I can actually use them and not have to worry about them getting destroyed on the road.
Yeah.
But kind of the drawback on that is when there was also some bomber missions that were taking place all the way up to the point of, the invasion happening. A lot of the bombs weren't successful because the bomber pilots during that invasion of Sicily, there was instances where the bombers dropped their bombs too soon and actually hit some of their landing craft and the troops. So like these pilots, because of that happening, not the same pilots.
Yeah.
But they knew about that. They were kind of hyper aware of that and would hold off for an extra few seconds. Well, an extra few seconds when you're flying in a plane like we were talking about is hundreds of yards, if not thousands. And so you're not hitting. I don't know why this never occurred to them, and maybe it did and they just didn't mention it. Why would you bomb going directly over the beach the short way instead of lining yourself up and all your bombers to go over the beach the long way to where then you're opening, you can drop, like, you're not having, because if you're dropping it the long way, like you're flying in this situation north to south, the beach stretches east to west. You have to pinpoint a very specific part to hit just one target. And then when you're dropping your bombs, they don't all drop at the same time. It's a line of them. So I don't know why you wouldn't fly along the beach in the same direction that the beach goes and all your bombers would drop them that way.
My guess would be that they would probably be over land so much longer that
you're more susceptible to all the guns that are right there on the coast.
People preparing for you to fly over coming north to south.
That's
so they
true.
could kind of lead you and pick you off. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're definitely lessening your chances of hitting things. It's just such a, like, I don't know. Seems like we should have had better technology than to not hit the landing parties if they were going that far inland.
Yeah.
But then again, you do talk about the smoke that was in the air and everything else that was diverting and making things that were tougher to see, which I mean, I really can't judge or say I'm critical of any of this shit because I couldn't have come up with any of it. But there's just so many different things, and it comes down to sheer numbers. Just the absolute kind of fight that the Germans had, because we ended up killing a lot of French folks ourselves, right?
Well, there were more French casualties, I think, throughout Operation Overlord than there were German casualties. And a lot of that has to do with when, towns like Caen, we knew that was a German stronghold, and so to soften it up, it got bombed.
Yeah, but they were holding French people in the city.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate that it happened that way, but they also got all their stuff back.
Yes. But, yeah, so situations like that, yeah, you're going to have the French casualties, unfortunately. But, yeah, so, I mean, the other beaches did fare a little bit better, so I don't know if I mentioned it. So out of the 34,000 that stormed Omaha, 2,400 casualties. Again, casualties either mean killed, wounded, or missing, just basically not able to be counted on to fight.
Yeah.
So we move on to Gold Beach, and on Gold, Juno, and Sword, they actually fared better than on Omaha. Gold had 25,000 British invade it, only 400 casualties. So they did a great job and were able to push pretty far inland. Juno was the second worst, and out of 21,400 troops that landed on Juno, they had 1,200 casualties. And then Sword at the very end, 29,000 British troops landed with 630 casualties. And I believe Sword is where they landed the most tanks. And that's why they were able to lessen their casualties so much, is because they had some armor there to take on the armor on the German side, or the artillery. And then using those tanks, I think one of the missions for the soldiers, their big mission for the guys landing on the beach was to try to essentially turn it into one continuous controlled beachhead, so to pretty much shore up all the distance between the beaches to where they controlled it.
Off, yeah.
They also wanted to make sure that they were connecting with the airborne troopers that dropped to make sure that they had, secured the area. And that town, Caen, that was one of their missions too, was to try to take that, and they weren't able to do it within this first or second day due to German resistance and like some tank formations that came in. But as far as at the end of the day for D-Day, yeah, the Allies had established a pretty solid foothold. I think I want to say it was something in the neighborhood of the width of the 50-mile beachhead, and then maybe about 4 miles inland. Which, I mean,
It ain't bad.
no, that's not. I mean, if you go outside and you try to look 4 miles, you'd be like, okay, that's a pretty big, piece of area. But at the same time, in comparison to the country of France and having room to maneuver and everything like that, not at all. So
if I was a German, I probably would have rather taken my chances on Utah Beach or Omaha Beach, because I feel like the British people probably had a little bit extra for the Germans after everything
I would
that
imagine
they'd gone
that.
through.
I would imagine that the Americans were pretty, just slightly less pissed off for the fact of saying, like, you made us fucking come all the way across the ocean because you started this shit. Some of us have already had to fight you fuckers in, like, Italy and everything.
We're back
Africa.
for round 2.
Yes, and now we're having to come back because you guys won't go the fuck away.
I think that's part of some of the stuff that I was kind of listening to was a lot of these guys that went over there. There were definitely a lot of first timers, and this was their first go around. But there was a lot of soldiers that had already seen action, either in North Africa that had been moved or on a different front.
But that's purposeful. You're going to send in veterans because they know essentially, and they're used to that, and they can operate as soldiers without that fear, than sending in green recruits.
It is, but I think you only have so much like ability to put up with that shit. Like
There
after
is,
you've seen so much.
Have you heard of the Well of Courage? There was a guy in Parliament, I think, someone that knew Churchill, and he talked about the Well of Courage, and that everybody has a Well of Courage. They're not, everyone's is deeper or shallow. When that well runs out, you're done.
Yeah.
And they said that is applicable of all men and all soldiers, and they had an understanding of that. And they're like, these people that are able to keep going and be able to perform, their well is just deeper, but that's not saying anything about them. It's just like everyone has this well of courage, and sometimes they use too much of it through their actions. And when you run out and you're just not able to operate anymore. And hopefully, I'm not exactly sure how the whole, everyone was fucking traumatized, like from the fucking get-go on this. I'm just wondering kind of what the procedure for someone like suffering, what would they call it? Shock? Or like shell shock or something like that.
Shell shock.
Shell shock. What they would do for those people? Because again, those people are as much a danger to, their fellow soldiers as they are to themselves of not being able to perform their tasks. So, I mean, and with D-Day being essentially the day that the invasion occurred, taking a look at Operation Overlord as a whole, that took place, and Operation Overlord is considered to take place for about a period of 3 months while they're establishing, their foothold in Europe. And by the end of August, more than 2 million Allied troops were in France. So they were bringing in people as quickly as fucking possible. With the Mulberry Harbors, I think they were able to bring in something like 6,000 tons of supplies daily off of the operational Mulberry Harbor.
It's a brilliant system. That number, I don't remember if it was last episode or I said it earlier in this episode, but 5 days after D-Day, they had brought over 300,000 troops, 54,000 vehicles, and 104,000 tons of supplies.
54,000 vehicles.
Just using those Mulberry Harbors.
Yes.
That's just a marvel.
54,000.
Huh? I don't know if that includes planes and everything that they could have flown over into there, but
they didn't have airfields yet. They only had that. I mean, that would have been jeeps, tanks, troop transports, artillery pieces, anything and everything. But part of Operation Overlord was also they had their eyes on Cherbourg, and so that was part of the operation that falls under Overlord. So you had troops that were landing in that actually cut off the continent peninsula, so it was 22 miles wide. So they landed at Utah basically on the far east side of the peninsula, 22 miles over to the end of it on the west. They cut that off for any German reinforcements and then just basically made their way up to the peninsula. And eventually after the British Navy was bombarding it from the sea, and the soldiers were pushing in from land. I want to say that the Germans did go ahead and surrender it, but not before they totally fucked up and like trashed the harbor. So they completely mined it, destroyed as much stuff as they could to basically keep us from being able to use it. And it was, I think, July 16th is when they were actually able to capture Cherbourg. And I think within, I want to say, a month, maybe a month and a half, they had cleared out and repaired the harbor enough to start using it. And then shit was just coming straight from America right to Cherbourg. So they were able to bring in even, they had a proper functional port that they were able to bring in even more supplies.
I mean, in the scope of time, it sounds like a long time, and knowing the hours put into every one of those days, it was an eternity. But all in all, that's a pretty fast mission.
Yeah. Yeah, insanely fast. And looking at it, like, you don't realize the depth of it. You just understand the planning of the invasion itself. But everything that's planned, there's never hey, let's go ahead and, get the invasion over with, establish the beachhead, and then figure out how we're going to get stuff over there. Everything was already, all the wheels were already in motion for everything to get over there. They knew that they wouldn't be able to get fuel over there, and they knew that providing tankers and everything wasn't really feasible because, again, the Mulberry Harbors, you would then just have to unload it onto trucks or everything. Did you ever hear of the Pluto pipeline under the ocean?
Yes. Yeah, it was above ground, but it was below water. It just ran along the ocean floor, didn't it?
Yep. So these trawlers that had these huge spools on the back of them basically stretched this 3-inch diameter, and there were multiple ones. I think they said they ended up using somewhere between there ended up being 20 of them over the course of this. They stretched it from, I think, the Isle of Wight all the way over to Normandy, and were pumping fuel from England over there.
How long would that take?
I don't know. It's a 3-inch. I mean, that's got to be just high pressured.
Yeah, but high pressured for back in the 40s. I mean, what could that look like? Was that
I don't know. To get that first fuel to come through, hours.
You think it's just like they have a bunch of dudes over there that are just sucking
a hose like you're trying to siphon it out of gas. Like, how long am I going to have to do this? As long as it fucking takes.
Can you taste anything yet? No, then keep going.
Do you smell anything yet? I think I'm getting a whiff of something. Keep sucking. So, 11 weeks after this, Paris gets liberated. It takes 11 weeks. And I'm not saying that in the scope of it took 11, it only takes 11 weeks for them to be able to push. That's already 100, and in 11 weeks, they've already moved 150 miles west toward Germany.
Fighting pretty much the whole way.
Yes.
Bigger, smaller skirmishes, but they're running across.
They're running into pockets and everything. They're bypassing some stuff. Because of the equipment and everything wasn't a for sure as far as the use of equipment and fuel and everything. Eisenhower didn't want to make single thrusts into enemy territory, deep into enemy territory. He wanted more of a broad front, even though it moved more slowly, just to make sure he could resupply his equipment and troops and everything. So, I mean, they were moving at a little bit slower rate, but they were also bypassing some areas. I think they bypassed or just cut off Calais, and then just assigned a certain segment to just kind of siege Calais until they could get it or something like that.
So they took Calais kind of from behind then?
Yeah, but I don't think they made it a priority to where they turned the whole army toward Calais and was like, we're going to take this.
I think cut it off. It was part. Yeah,
it was kind of part of, because you can only, with supplies, you can only hold out for so long.
Yeah.
And at this point, again, the Luftwaffe is basically non-existent or can't do anything. The German Navy was never really a thing. You think German Navy and Kriegsmarine and all that stuff, it was almost all U-boats. That was what their Navy was.
What was the other one? An F-boat? A C-boat? There was another one that was that Operation Tiger where they ran across them. They were J-boats or some shit.
E-boats.
E-boats, yeah.
They were torpedo boats.
Okay.
Do you remember the show McHale's Navy?
Uh-huh.
It was like that, where the two torpedo launchers on the side, so they could be fast and be agile, but they could still try to launch torpedoes and sink larger ships.
Okay.
There was one ship that got sank during Overlord, during the invasion, during Neptune.
Yeah,
an E-boat snuck in. It was a Dutch destroyer or something like that.
But was it? It wasn't over on Omaha or Utah. I feel like it was a British one, wasn't it?
No, it was Dutch. I know it wasn't British or American. Oh, and I forgot to mention this, like just talking about like single crazy things that happened during the day. So it was on one of the British beaches, and they could see that they were getting bogged down. So the commander that was out there with the Navy told the two destroyers that was with him, get in as close as you can and put fire on the fortifications. These things that got within about 1,000 yards, which sounds, or yeah, 1,000 yards, which sounds like
Pretty
a
far.
lot, but I mean for a boat, pretty close. It was to the point where they're in danger of grounding themselves by dragging their bottoms.
Oh, okay.
And basically, this one of them turned sideways. They thought the guys on the beach thought it was coming directly at him, like it had been hit and it was trying to beach itself. They said it turned and just went straight down the line of the beach, about 1,000 yards out, just firing shots at German fortifications. And then when it got to the end of the beach, they said the boat stopped. They threw it in reverse and started reversing back and firing against the fortifications as well.
Shit.
There was a situation where I don't know if it was a destroyer or if it was a cruiser or a battleship, but on one of the beaches, they were having trouble sighting up on targets because of the distance. They spotted a disabled tank, but the tank, its gun was still operational. It was firing shots at these fortifications. The guys on the boat were able to see the lob of the shot and where it was landing and use that as a
Like a
spotter,
measurement to...
as a measurement and as a spotter, and we're using this tank to
Wow.
help them aim and hit these fortifications. So I mean, just kind of like crazy stories from throughout that day itself, but kind of getting back to after and kind of toward the end of Operation Overlord. So yeah, Paris gets liberated as part of that, and then I think they said that Operation Overlord ends up ending in. I'm trying to figure out which month it was that they said it was over, and then kind of give you the final numbers as far as what ended up happening. It went to the 3rd of August, so 2 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days is what the operation. Do you ever see pictures in like the Normandy pictures, and you see the they look like weather balloons? They're sitting up on all the ships. Do you ever wonder what those are?
Was that the radar?
No, they were called barrage balloons, and ships would carry these, and they would like put them up in the air. They were basically these big balloons that were shaped like the cartoon-shaped bombs with like the big part and the fins out the back, and they had a bunch of steel cables that were holding them down. They were to deter planes from being able to come down and strafe them and attack them, because the planes could hit the cables or the balloons and everything, and it would destroy the plane. So they were like some weird type of anti-aircraft deterrents.
Huh.
But like if you ever look at pictures of like any of the beaches on Normandy when they a few hours after the landings, when all the ships are coming in and landing, you see just like a ton of balloons over the shoreline.
We went through a lot of different stuff just for protection and all that kind of thing. We just
And all of it came out of experience of something happening. So
Yeah.
ships got strafed and hit, and they're like, how can we stop this? Why don't we just put a fucking balloon with a bunch of steel cables up in the air?
the craftiness and engineering that went into this stuff, and it wasn't even like you say, it was experiences that they'd had in the past that weren't like too distant past, so they were kind of
They were adapting,
pivoting on the go.
Yes, they were having to. It's the same thing with the Hobart Funnies.
Yeah.
They needed something to clear mines off the beach. They threw a flail on there. They needed floating tanks and all that kind of stuff. So essentially by, the end of July, so a month and a half, almost 2 months after the invasion, like I said, about 1.5 million troops. Within that same kind of area, the Germans had about 380,000 troops in France in July. And
Just numbers, man.
I know, man, but here's the thing: is that though those troops weren't the cream of the crop, we were sending in our best and our freshest, the guys that hadn't been just fighting nonstop.
That's what I mean, though. 1.5 million against 300,000 is already a massive advantage. But if you're not getting the A team from that 300,000, like it's
It's even more of a offset. Like,
yeah.
but I mean, they also did have all their artillery pieces. They had the defensive positions. That's one of the things that took them so long on D-Day to try to accomplish the missions and kind of push their beachfront back a few miles. Is they said that they would get through. They would get through a line of defense like the beach and everything, and they would start making their way through the fields or the roads. And like I was telling you, like it's all farmland with all, the square fields with all the trees and the hedgerows. Germans would just have machine gun nests set up within these hedgerows, and then you would try to flank it and go around to the side, and there would be another nest there, just defending the other one's
Yeah.
backside. They said they ran into situations where they ran into that scenario five times in a row, where it was like, we're going to go flank it. There's another machine gun. Go. So you ran into these situations where you had all these hidden pockets of Germans that were just picking off people.
When you're not radioing in air support to come fire on these hedges either. You have to take those things on full force.
Yep. Well, most of the planes too were probably not available. They were flying back to rearm or do shit like that. So I mean, when all was said and done during the operation, casualties as far as the Allies go, 124,000 casualties, 20,500 killed for the Americans, 65,000 casualties for the Brits. 11,000 of those were killed. For whose flag is that? It's a British flag with something in the...
Aussies?
No, is that the Canadians? Who's that? Yeah, oh, it must have been the Canadian flag. 18,500, that looks weird, it's got a little British flag in it. 18,500 casualties, 5,000 killed. And then we also had some people that were like Polish that had escaped, that were fighting and everything like that, and their casualties were 2,000.
There were a mix of other places that had been taken over that came to fight.
So as far as in Overlord, yeah, U.S., United Kingdom, Canada, France, Poland, Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Greece, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, and South Africa.
That's some shit.
And for the Axis, it was Germany and Italy. So you see where the good guys are, what side the good guys are on. So a total for that, just that operation alone, man, Overlord, 226,000 casualties, 4,100 aircraft destroyed, and 4,000 tanks destroyed. And it's just like, we'll make more. 4,000, like...
It's a lot of what I kind of said at the beginning, where we weren't looking for the least amount of casualties to be spent. We knew that it
was a balance between sacrifice and what's going to try to end this thing the fastest, and what do we think we have the highest success rate despite the casualties.
The inherent risk was just there.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of like you were saying, civilians and everything, during that operation, between 25 and 39,000 civilians killed.
You're trying to take these cities over, and these people are in the cities. Like, it's going to get bombed. They're going to be slaughtered. They're going to be used as human shields. Mm-hmm. Like, that's unfortunately just going to happen. I'm not saying that those were all the situations, because I'm sure we had some fuck-ups and hit the wrong places, but...
Well, here's kind of like... Here, I'll present a scenario to you. So you're the Germans, you're in a French town, and... Do you keep the French populace there by force?
I say, wait, in what situation?
Okay, so like, let's say we're dealing with a D-Day situation. You're in Caen. Germans are holding it.
Yeah.
We bombed it, or we're gonna bomb it. Do you keep the French civilians in the city to try to deter bombings and stuff like that, or do you let them leave?
Oh, I think you kill them.
You think you... Well, I would think you would keep them in there.
Yeah, keep them and kill them.
Yeah.
Because
if they escape, they might give out information about where you're at. So I don't think they're letting them escape, but I don't think they would actively just kill French... I mean, I understand that.
If you get overrun by a bunch of troops and the French see that they have backup, they're going to try to help you. Or they're going to try to help the Allied forces.
I don't know about that, man. I don't think a lot of it was like French like fighting men. I think those guys were still in like prisoner camps or like sent to like work camps and everything.
But even if you have 5,000 more people there, men or women really, and you get the forces coming up, they're going to see that that's their
I think you're more
point.
concerned with getting the fuck out of there than you are with killing the civilian populace and then trying to leave after that.
Well, yeah, and that's what it comes down to. Are you going to try to hold that place, or are you going to be running?
Here's the other thing too. You kill those people and you get captured, that's war crime situation.
I don't know if that's really what was on the German mind. I don't think war crimes were really at the highest of...
I would think in the way that war crimes probably weren't on their minds, I think getting the fuck out of there if they saw that they were going to lose would probably be more on their minds. But again, I'm not going to sit here and say I understand the German soldier's mind.
Well, and you have to look at the situation, because We're in 1944. I don't know if the writing on the wall has quite shown up for everybody that this may be an unwinnable thing for Germany.
Germany, even Hitler said that if the invasion was successful, it's going to have like severe repercussions. I don't think he said it's going to result in defeat, but I'm pretty sure that Rommel even said something about if they got past the beaches, then the war was over. He'd even made a mention of that. In fact, kind of like going back before the end of Overlord when D-Day was occurring. So finally, they fucking wake up Hitler. Was it like 1 o'clock in the afternoon? They finally send someone in to wake him up to tell him what's going on. And of course, he probably has a freak out and fucking takes a bunch of meth. But he ends up, getting together with Rommel and Rundstedt and everything to fucking find out what happened. And I want to say, like, Rundstedt got fucking canned. And then Rommel had said something kind of against Hitler, like, this isn't going to work, or was kind of, I can't remember. If
Shouldn't have slept through this one.
Huh?
Shouldn't have slept through this one.
Yeah. But Rommel ends up dying in a car accident, like, a few weeks later or something. Yeah.
We didn't even get him?
No.
That's a bummer.
Well, here's the thing, too, is I don't know if Rommel would have technically been from, and I'm not speaking because I don't know a ton, but I want to say Rommel was someone who had suggested at certain points surrendering.
So everything. The best Nazi is what you're saying.
I'm not saying that. It was October 14th, 44. Yeah, he died. I think he died in a car accident.
That's
and then another guy that was in charge or something in another position ended up shooting himself. So it was kind of a revolving door of leadership at that point, kind of like the Union was during that first part of the Civil War, just like next man up.
I would have loved to have seen Hitler's reaction when he woke up that next morning, because he went to sleep while they were living in this like 2-week window where everything was probably going to be okay, which I'm sure for him he probably didn't know a whole lot about that because he was so removed from the fighting. Like
my whole thing with Hitler is that up until this point, with the exception of things not going ideal in Russia, he's never been like beat.
Tested.
Like, yeah, for aside from fucking and the North Africa shit, but aside from that, he still controls such a huge piece of Europe, for the most part, all of it, that I don't think it really occurs to him that, like, he knows an invasion can happen, but I don't know if he has that part of his brain, the normal part that says, like, hey, losing is an option. Like, this is a very real scenario that if you don't play this right, I don't think he ever, like, understood that losing was a possibility for him and a high likelihood for him. And so when this stuff happened, I think he was just like, it's somebody else's fault, but now, like, I gotta do some more meth and figure this shit out.
Well, yeah, that was, like you say, he had the fighting with Russia where there was some pushback, and this was kind of like the first offensive blow, really. Besides, I mean, England was bombing parts of Germany and all that kind of stuff, but this was like the first pushback. Not the first offense, but like the first really...
It's a rational conversation when me and you were having it here that this stuff should have been writing on the wall, but this guy is literally a psychopath.
Yeah, no,
so there's no way to wrap our minds around what could have been, going through his mind at that point. But I really do think that when you boil it down, because after Normandy and after D-Day and Overlord and the Allies getting a foothold and being in Europe, the war was over in 45. Once we were able to push back, at that point, the Germans didn't have the industrial capacity to go ahead and keep up with really anything. Their navy was almost non-existent. And the big reason, too, why I think that Hitler kind of underestimated the invasion is when he served in World War I think he was more of like he was a land guy, like land warfare and everything. So he thought that because he'd had so much success for that was the superior. And I don't think he had, in his limited cognitive ability, I don't think he had the ability to comprehend like a seaborne invasion being this successful or this big. I think he just underestimated it and didn't take it seriously enough.
Did he see a lot of action in World War I?
I'm not sure. We'll have to cover that when we eventually do Hitler.
Yeah.
But I can safely say, and I think it goes, along the lines of a lot of actual professional historians instead of armchair historians. But this moment was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. you could, set your clock by it and be like, from this time, the timer's on. It's a countdown. And as far as the world goes, a turning point in the world that had it not been successful, I think in some other way, we could have, we could have won, whether it be just us continually bombing the shit out of Germany until there was nothing left, or leveling Berlin or something like that. I'm glad it didn't come to that. But at the same time, like, how much longer would that have taken us, and how many more lives possibly to do another invasion and then fight them? And so, I mean, if it
we know what was coming next. We can extrapolate on how they would have done it, but we know what the ultimate answer was.
Well, and the other thing too, man, if this would have, like we were saying, from this date till, the end of the war, it's, when was VE Day?
Well, this would have, had this not, excuse me, taken effect, we would have dropped an atomic bomb on Germany.
Well, here's the thing. I was just going to say exactly along those lines. So May 8th is when Victory in Europe Day was. So less than a year after Normandy happens. Let's say Normandy's not successful. Shit goes awry. There's a pack of U-boats waiting and sinks a ton of the invasion fleet, whatever. So we have to go back to the drawing board, figure something else out. Had we given Germany more time, we know that they were researching atomic bombs and nuclear bombs because of the hard water thing, from what Einstein, or who did the letter come from? Wasn't I Enrico Fermi or something like that? There was a letter that or maybe it was Einstein that wrote the letter to Roosevelt that told him about the program.
Yeah, okay. It was Einstein.
Had Germany had that extra time and would have become more desperate or more emboldened by the fact that the invasion failed, they could have developed. I mean, I know this is going out there and being like, oh, alternative future, like what could have happened? But if they were researching it, there could have been a point where if they would have gotten it before we did, or, even after we got it, and we bombed them a couple times with a couple atomic bombs, but then they end up developing one and sending it into I mean, I'm just saying, like, there's so many possibilities of what could have gone horribly wrong had this invasion not worked.
Well, and had they had France still, it wouldn't have been a whole lot to lob a nuclear weapon over into England.
Exactly. They already had the V2s.
Yeah.
They just attached that thing to one of the V2s, or they could have continued to terror bomb London with more V2s.
There excuse me, could have been so much more of a chance, but after we used and saw what the atomic bomb did to Japan, there was no way that wasn't going to be on the table if we didn't get in there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
it would have been round-the-clock bombing. I mean, we saw the schedule during Oppenheimer for what they had planned out if the first two didn't put Japan into submission.
There was like 3 or 4 or 5 others.
There was like 8 others that were coming that direction. Yeah. So we would have switched directions quick.
Yeah, this is probably the moment in history that I've researched the most out of anything just over the years, just because there's so many different ways to look at this, from the individual stories about the guys storming the beaches, the paratroopers, the guys on the boats, bombarding it, the guys that were doing all of the lead up work and researching and creating the plans, the spies that were swimming on the beaches and fucking studying sand and all that kind of stuff. Just all of that to come together. And for this to work was incredible.
Yeah, it's not. I think it's further away now than it ever has been of World War II survivors to kind of hear this story still, and I'm sure, being this far removed, the memories. Well, I mean, depending on what you saw, they're probably still pretty clear.
And this isn't to get like sentimental or anything like that, but I had this thought that we're very close here within the next few years to not having any World War II survivors.
Or Holocaust survivors.
Or Holocaust survivors, people that can tether these events to reality, because once those people are gone, that's when stuff starts to feel more like fiction than fact. And events that we lose when there's not somebody that can directly tie us to that or tell us, hey, that really happened, that's when we kind of lose sight of stuff and the importance of it. And I think that's why I like, this topic and topics like it so much. It's because of course there was, incentives for us to go to war and defeat Germany and everything like that. But this is really the last time I feel like humanity was like good and evil and there wasn't a ton of gray. It was when, people stepped up, ordinary men from all over that were a different breed of people. That's why they call them the greatest generation, man. The people that took part in this, it's because it is true. I mean, dude, this was their life struggle.
Well, we don't have anything.
We don't have anything even comparable to it, and these people are still around. And here's what I would ask of the people that listen to this: try to find somebody that was alive at this point. You don't have to go to them and ask them to tell you stories or anything like that, but maybe just thank them and be appreciative that they're still around. And if you get to know them, maybe they will share some wisdom with you. But we need to cherish the people that actually did this kind of stuff, that changed the world for the better, that really did actually, save us.
Yeah, I fumbled the bag personally on this very badly because I hit the grandpa jackpot because grandpa on mom's side was at Pearl Harbor. Grandpa on dad's side was over, I don't know if he was a part of Operation Overlord, but he was over in France and took shrapnel, and that's literally the only part that I know. And the only reason that I know is because my dad and I went to the VA with him one time. Mm-hmm. I was like, so what part of the war did Grandpa fight in? My dad's like, he was over in Normandy. And at that point in my life, I was just like, oh, that's crazy. What happened to him? He's like, he took shrapnel from a mine. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I remember asking my grandpa about it one more time, and there was like 2 seconds of conversation, and then that was it. It's like, that should be something that I should have talked to both of them more about, mm-hmm. had I known the significance of what it was to be able to pass that down to at least another generation. Because, I mean, there's stories behind both of them that deserve to still be told, and it's like family history. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it wasn't passed down enough, and I don't know, it's because they didn't like talking about it, that maybe that's what happened.
How could you?
Yeah.
Like, you definitely lost friends. Everything, you saw things that would scar you for your entire life, and that you would hear loud noises, PTSD and everything like that. It's just, you wouldn't want to talk about it. You're lauded, deservedly so, as, a heroic generation, and you should receive all of those accolades. But I don't, no one should have the expectation for someone to want to relive that. So,
no.
But yeah, an amazing topic. Celebrating again, guys. We're a day away from the 79th anniversary of it. Do something nice, drop by the VA if you have time to do it. But yeah, take some time and look into this topic and be thankful that these people stepped up when we needed them to.
Yeah, hope that doesn't ever happen again.
Exactly. All right, guys, thanks for joining this on our 2-part celebration of Operation Overlord and D-Day. We'll be back at you next week with something different. Later.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.